So, hello all. Um, Today I was thinking we're going to highlight a studio which is very much a PC specific outfit. It's a bit more recent. It's not an old. It's still a current active studio, but with a very interesting background and very interesting approach. This studio is called Graviteam. It's a Ukrainian studio, um, founded in 2004 in Kharkov or Kharkiv in Ukraine. And notable persons in this outfit, which first of all, the studio has a connection to the Ukrainian military, but also to the Kharkov Polytechnic, the university. So you have a lead programmer, Andrei Suev, and you have a physics programmer called Dmitry Gapon, also programmed, or Gapon, also programmed AI. And of course you have designers Dmitry and Sergei Yashin, with who basically created the studio Graviteam to create realistic simulations based on like military operations or operational level simulations and tank simulations, armor simulation in particular. So also at least with the initial designs, they brought along also several consultants and experts, like the Blitzkrieg designer and armored warfare expert Boris Vitalyevich Yulin, and other experts to consult on statistics and so on. So the idea here is very much towards realistic simulation. And the thing with Graviteam is that they create like they have an insane focus on detail, which is what makes their stuff so interesting. Their CEO Vladimir Sayarny himself served between 1988 and 1989 with the KGB Special Forces in Afghanistan. So you have in the team like military or experience. So the focus is very much on realism. So they have with the strong commitment of realism. They started developing tools for military use. So the like armored car simulations, the BRDM sim, for instance, for professional use by the Ukrainian military, and also created a garden designer software called X Designer, which was previously called Garden Planner 3D. But like the idea is they had this idea to take this experience and create the most dynamic simulation engine that was possible. And today they have a dedicated fan base of hardcore simulation enthusiasts. Like so some of their games, commercial games, have even been used for professional presentations and so on, and history presentations and so on at the university level, because they have the engine itself is very, they have their core engine technology is very much in depth. So they seek complete realism, and with all their games they've traveled the Kharkov landscape to take pictures and study historical documents and so on, but also went to different places depicted in their simulations to gather reference materials. And all their games feature a dynamic modeling with no scripting. So it's all dynamic. So whatever happens within the game or on the battlefields of the game are normally part of the dynamic AI system. So they like the first. No, normally they first released their games in the Russian and Eastern European markets, but then found Western publishing and it was very early on self-publishing, so they sold their games through the internet as well. But now you can purchase their full catalog on Steam as well. And they have also some of the models used in their games have been outsourced to World of Tanks, which is probably a more broadly known franchise, but they've been a partner for World of Tanks. So the company goal, as stated by the CEO a few years back, is to create authentic games with full realistic modeling of damage and ballistics, as well as realistic and deformable terrain. So you can hear that this is very much in the simulation territory. So there's also a clear focus on user extension and there is a mod friendliness in the core engine, which makes it extendable, so you can create new scenarios and so on. So the focus is clearly on tank simulation and operational 3D real-time war games, where they have very much a niche of their own with their hyper-realistic real-time engine. So the core tech that they use, which has remained the same across most of the installations of their various simulations, have received great critical acclaim in the specialist press or among simulation enthusiasts for its sometimes almost insane level of detail. So, for instance, when creating the landscapes, they always make at least one field trip and study real life maps and so on. So the terrains are very much realistic, but also the general technical features of the simulation engine or their core technology is taken from experience with professional simulation engines for like professional military for training uses. So features of the engine includes a dynamic line of sight, which means it's completely dynamic. So if you have a curvature, for instance, in the landscape, that will affect line of sight, as well as like structures and vegetation and things like that. You have deformable terrain, so you can the terrain can get altered by as the combat progresses, which leads to various effects. You have very, very advanced vehicle dynamics. So you have suspension modeling, you have modeling of mechanical systems, you have vehicles that are the vehicle models are modular, so that you can destroy parts of vehicles, like you can destroy tracks or you can destroy ammo compartments and things like that without affecting the rest of the vehicles. So it's modular in nature, and all the modules have their own like statistics and armor levels and like penetration resistance and things like that. So it's very advanced. You can also have vehicles that bog down or that run into like get stuck on terrain or in mud and things like that. So you have all these vehicle dynamics combined with the terrain. Also very, very advanced ballistic simulation with that takes into account like wind, even ammunition qualities, the quality of the round fired, drop over distance, deflection, angle of impact, projectile rotation in flight that would skew perhaps the path of the round and so on. So very much advanced ballistics model. It's also very detailed armor and material penetration simulation with like slope deflection angles, whereby if you have a sloping armor, you have different types of deflection angles based on the round and on the shape of the round and on the impact, the velocity of the impact on the angle. You have fragmentation simulation and kinetic force of impact simulations. So you can have a vehicle that is hit by a projectile which will not penetrate the armor, but you could have internal fragmentation, for instance, which would harm the crew, for instance, things like that. You have fragmentation, and also kinetic force can cause damage to vehicles apart from the impact itself. You have a very realistic morale system where each unit has like a dynamic AI that will be affected by combat losses around them, lack of communication, the lack of leadership, so on, which will affect like the dynamic morale. You have realistic communication simulation in detail, which also includes like terrain that affects signaling and it affects the communication lines. You can also cut lines of communication. It can affect the enemy communication by disrupting their communication networks. Also, too many conflicting instructions will lead to confusion. This is also a very interesting simulation aspect, that instead of like you probably normally used to, like you can give any amount of order, you just give a new order. In this case, too many orders in too short duration would cause confusion, because of it takes time for orders to travel down the line, and your commanders may also get confused if you give too many orders. So you have a system for where you don't want to give too many orders. You want to give general orders, and then allow the detailed control to your AI commanders if possible. So they created quite a few games for home use, or for home commercial use, which I think you should all check. You should check out each and every one of them, because they are quite unique in their approach to like realism, because they focus on this maximum realism thing, where you have this very detailed models and this all of these statistics on the units, and you can the after action reports in all of these games. Like you can, in the tank simulations, you can take up any position in the tank, and you can have all the instruments properly simulated, and you have like in the after action reports, you can look at various types of where you were hit and what the deflection angles were and so on. So you can have like lots of detailed information. Quite difficult games, all of them, both to learn because of all of the complexity, but also because they are the scenarios are quite challenging. But in order of their Western release dates, their lists of games is, first of all, their catalog is, first of all, the tank simulation Steel Fury, Kharkov 1942, and the operational combat simulator Achtung Panzer, Kharkov 1943, which were both given a Western release in 2008. This was followed on by Graviteam Tactics Operation Star in 2012. So Operation Star is still very much a live game, with many players worldwide. And then you have another tank simulator called Steel Armor Blaze of War, which was released in the Western release in 2011, which is another tank sim using more modern tanks with scenarios. It also has a Basra expansion that has several operations with the Iraqi forces and it also scenarios like Angola, and so on. So it's more modern combat, whereas Steel Fury is on the Eastern Front, World War II. So Graviteam Tactics Mayus Front was released in 2016, which is the actual successor of Operation Star, which is the same engine again, but revised and with new operations. This is probably the best entry point into their catalog because it's the most refined. Then you have the spin-off Tank Warfare Tunisia 1943, which was released in 2017, which takes place in like the American campaigns in World War II and British campaigns. It has more of a scaled back or like smaller operational approach. And there's many DLCs and add-ons with new operations across different theaters released for these games, like South Africa, Angola, Iraq, etc., as well as like additional World War II operations which you can purchase. There's fan-made content as well for these. So, I mean, it's a very interesting developer and very much a very small independent outfit. And the graphics are rudimentary, and some parts of it is very janky, and it's also very difficult to learn, especially seeing as the manuals is also catastrophically bad, but in all the cases. But if you persevere, there is very few creations on any platform that has the same kind of like in-depth simulation that you can actually engage with. So it's very much the realism is the key element here, and the key thing for the entire approach is for maximum realism, which makes it very interesting. And it's also the tank simulations is still some of the, I mean, probably the pinnacles of the tank sim genre today, especially Steel Armor Blaze of War, which is still very much beloved full-on tank simulator. Also, Mayus Front, of course, has a very, very large following amongst like the hardcore simulation and wargaming fans. So I would advise to check out their games and to actually take some time in like supporting them, because this is a small Ukrainian outfit which has been like always sticking to their core like approach and realism, which is also have very, very, very technically skilled development outfit that actually manages to create this high level of simulation realism that is very interesting to engage with if you have the time. So you have to take the time for it, and I advise to start with maybe Mayus Front and Steel Armor Blaze of War, and they're both available on Steam these days, so I advise you start there, because that is probably the easiest entry. If you want to go back and see like the origins of it all, by all means go with like Achtung Panzer Kharkov 1943, which I don't know if it's available on Steam today. It was a Paradox physical release in the West, but if you can find it, that's a very interesting. The operations and scenarios in that is very interesting in itself. Even if Mayus Front is basically the same thing, but much more refined over the years. But the core is the same. So I really suggest looking up these games and actually take an interest in supporting this studio, especially at these times with like the ongoing conflict and so on in Ukraine, which is causing problems for them and their families, of course. But purchase purchase their games because it's very, very much worth it, and there is, quite frankly, just not much else like it on any platform. So you might as well, if you find that you enjoy these games and can like push through the initial barrier of entry, you might very well find yourself like completely obsessed with these games. So I really advise checking it out.